Mantreshu mam va upahuyayatvam akuntita kanda saratma bodha Vriche Prabhu mukta iva pramatas Tano mano mohayati vadeva. Repeatedly, please. Mantreshu mam va upahuyayatvam Akuntitas kanda sadatma bodha Vriche Prabhu mukta iva pramatas Tano mano hativa deva Mantreshu mam va upahuyayatvam Akuntita kanda sadatma bodha Vriche Prabhu mukta iva pramatas Dano mano mohayati vadeva. Mantreshu mam va upahuyayatvam Akuntita kanda sadatma bodha Vriche Prabhu mukta iva pramatas Dano mano mohayati vadeva. So word by word, mantreshu, in consultations, mam, unto me, vai, as either, upahuya, by calling, yat, as much as, tvam, your lordship, akuntita, without hesitation, akanda, without being separated, sada, eternally, atma, self, bodhaha, intelligent, prichrehe, asked, Prabhu, O my Lord, mugdaha, bewildered, eva, as if it were so, apramataha, although never bewildered, tat, that, naha, us, manaha, mind, mohayati, bewilders, eva, as it is so, deva, O my Lord. Translation and divine purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Charana-Ravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. O my Lord, your eternal self is never divided by the influence of time, and there is no limitation to your perfect knowledge. Thus you are sufficiently able to consult with yourself, yet you called upon me for consultation, as if bewildered, although you are never bewildered, and this act of yours bewilders me. Purport. Uddhava was never actually bewildered, but he says that all these contradictions appear to be bewildering. The whole discussion between Krishna and Uddhava was meant for the benefit of Maitreya, who was sitting nearby. The Lord used to call Uddhava for consultation when the city was attacked by Jarasandha and others, and when he executed great sacrifices as part of his routine royal work as Lord of Dwarka. The Lord has no past, present, and future because he is unhampered by the influence of eternal time, and thus nothing is hidden from him. He is eternally self-intelligent. Therefore, his calling for Uddhava to give him enlightenment is certainly astonishing. all these actions of the Lord appear to be contradictory, although there is no contradiction in the routine activities of the Lord. Therefore, it is better to see them as they are and not attempt to explain them. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome, dear devotees, for our wonderful opportunity to glorify this Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's also an opportunity for us to glorify Vrindavan Das Thakur, being the disappearance day of this wonderful, great, saintly personality. And it's really fascinating. When I was studying the life of Vrindavan Das Thakur, I came across Pankajanri Prabhu giving a beautiful class on Vrindavan Das Thakur's disappearance in May 2013. So it was a regular routine activity of the twin pujaris of Mayapur to go out on a boat, and they visited Mamgachi, which is a place in Modadrumadweep, one of the 9 islands of Vrindavan, was where Vrindavan Das Thakur was born in 1507. So regularly the twin pujaris, Jananivar and Pankajandri, went to Mamgachi to celebrate this disappearance festival of Vrindavan Das Thakur. And there's a very beautiful temple established there by Mukunda Dat and Vrindavan Dat. There's 2 pujaris there, and they established this temple, and they had Radha Madan Mohan, they had Radha Gopinath, and they also had Gaura Garodhara. So they worshipped these deities in the time of Lord Chaitanya in Mamgachi, where Vrindavan Das Thakur was born. And there's a very beautiful story that Pankajanri told. One of the disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his name was Sagara Maharaj. And so he was traveling on a train, having just left Mayapur, and in his dream he woke up with the carriage rattling, and he had this dream, and Radha Madan Gopal came in his dream and said, "Someone's trying to drown me, they're going to throw me in the water." So the deities appeared in Sagara Maharaj's dream, and then so he thought, I have to go back to Mayapur and see who is trying to drown this beautiful deity. So essentially what Sagara Maharaj, he knocked on so many doors, have you seen this Radha Madan Gopal deity? And then eventually he came across the original house established by Mukundan Dat for worship. And what had happened through the period of time, it had been sold to non-Vaishnavas, and then so indeed they were going to throw the deities in the water. And then so Sagara Maharaj saved the throwing of the deities in the water, much to the delight of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and all the Vaishnavas. So now we can go to Mamgachi in Modadrumadweep and worship the Radha Madan Gopal deity there, much in the spirit of Vrindavan Das Thakur. So Vrindavan Das Thakur had a very auspicious beginning to life. His father was Vaikuntanath Vipra, a very exalted saintly personality, and his mother was Narayani Devi. So if we consult the Gaura Ganadesh Dipika of Kavi Kanapur, we can understand that Narayani Devi actually appears in Radha Krishna Leela as Kilimbika. So Kilimbika was famous for eating Krishna's prasadam remnants. So essentially, and then Narayani appears in Gaura Leela, and in the same way she took the remnants of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So they received so much mercy, and this is the mother of Vrindavan Das Thakur. And we know from previously that Vrindavan Das Thakur is an expansion or an incarnation of Vyasadeva to fulfill the requirement of writing down all the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. Vyasadeva manifests as Vrindavan Das Thakur. So Vrindavan Das Thakur received so much mercy, and then some of his mercy was demonstrated when he took Diksha from Nityananda. So he's a direct disciple of Nityananda. And then if we consult, there's a beautiful Nityanandashtakam that's written describing all the beautiful qualities of Lord Nityananda. Being Vrindavan Das Thakur's disappearance day, we are allowed to glorify Lord Nityananda, because therefore he's one of the most foremost, or if not the foremost disciple of Nityananda. So, and then there's a beautiful bhajan, Bhaje Nityanandam Bhajana Tarukandam Niravadi. So it's a whole 8 verses, and then perhaps if we look at the 9th verse, and we can understand exactly what benefit one gets from reciting this beautiful Nityanandashtakam. It says, anyone who recites this Nityanandashtakam, Nityananda Prabhu places his lotus feet of the heart of one who lovingly recites this unprecedented Nityanandashtaka. This Nityanandashtaka is the reservoir of all rasa, the greatest treasure of the most exalted Rasika Vaishnavas, and the storehouse of the essence of Bhakti Ras. So Vrindavan Das Thakur is explaining the characteristics of Lord Nityananda. And he's saying he walked around like a maddened elephant. And he is the embodiment of pure spiritual energy. His face holds a gentle smile, and the performance of his Nam Sankirtan pierces the influence of Kali Yuga. So Vrindavan Das Thakur writes a beautiful pastime of Lord Nityananda when he would knock on all the doors of the residents of Bengal, and he would say, I sell myself to you, I am yours, if you chant the holy names of Hare Krishna, and chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So it's really interesting when Vrindavan Das Thakur explains Nityananda as the mainstay of all rasas. So we know from Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that there's 5 primary rasas: Shantaras, Dasiras, Sakyaras, Vatsalyaras, and Madhurya-ras. So Balaram in his manifestation as Nityananda, he's the mainstay of all those rasas. So he even becomes in conjugal ras, being Radharani's younger sister, Ananga Manjari. That's an expansion of Balaram. So he is able to be the mainstay of all rasas, even Madhurya ras. And Shantaras, he allows himself to be Krishna's chair, he allows himself to be Krishna's jumper, Krishna's blanket, Krishna's bed. That's in Shantaras, or passive adoration. So Vrindavan Das Thakur explains so many wonderful pastimes of Lord Nityananda in his Chaitanya Bhagavat. And originally he named it Chaitanya Mangala, and then at the same time Lochana Das Thakur wrote the same book, Chaitanya Mangala, and so therefore as a result of that, then Vrindavan Das Thakur decided to change the name of his book to Chaitanya Bhagavat. And there's so many beautiful stories in there explaining the glorious pastimes of Lord Nityananda. And perhaps one of the most amazing stories from Chaitanya Bhagavat is the bewilderment of the thieves. So as we know, Nimai was born in a very beautiful family, the son of Shachi Mata and also the son of Jagannath Mishra. So essentially, Nimai performed the activities like that of Gopal Krishna. So there was a lot of breaking of pots, there was a lot of stealing of butter, there was a lot of throwing ghee all over the floor. And so Nimai played this very amazing trick on his mother. He would come, when she would come inside to see what all the commotion was, she'd hear the broken pots, she would come inside and see Nimai and he'd be laying on his back crying. So then Shachi Mata would turn to Jagannath Mishra and say, some demon has broken into our house. It's because we're chanting the mantras that our little baby Nimai was protected. So they realized very early on that Nimai very much loved the sound of his own name. So much so that he was crying and nothing could pacify him. Maybe breastfeeding wouldn't pacify him, rocking him, singing him songs. But then finally the elderly ladies realized the chanting of the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That immediately pacified Nimai. He stopped crying, and so this was his original way to encourage the Sankirtan movement. Tears streaming from his eyes, crying, and then that would be pacified by the chanting of the holy names. So Jagannath Mishra was astonished by this act of all the pots and pans being broken and thought it was an act of providence. So as soon as Sachi and Jagannath saw the face of Nimai, they forgot all their distress. So as soon as, and for us, we can realize that when we chant out the holy names of the Lord, all of our distress is gone. Krishna's holy name has all the potency to fulfill us, to free us from the anxieties that we may feel as a result of the contamination of this material world. So then the time of the name-giving ceremony arrived for Nimai. And so they all gathered together, and all the ladies were very beautifully dressed with their vermilion in their hair and the gopi dots on their face. And they were very chaste ladies called Lakshmi Praya. So when the ladies are very chaste, they're known as Lakshmi Praya with the vermilion in their hair. And so as soon as they saw the little baby, they said, he must be called Nimai. Give him the name Nimai. It's so beautiful. You've already lost 6 daughters, so Nimai will be the perfect name for him. So essentially then the learned scholars headed by Nilambara Chakravarti came, and then they said, well, perhaps his first name can be Vishvambara and then his second name could be Nimai, not wanting to displease all the residents there. And so they noticed, all these elderly scholars, that since Nimai was born, there have been sufficient rains and all the surrounding provinces have been devoid of famine. So such as when Krishna descends on this world, there's so much opulence, there's so much beauty. And it's interesting because Prabhupada writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that all the devotees of Lord Shiva, they live very opulently, they have so much wealth, they have so many facilities, and then yet Lord Shiva is living in a crematorium, living very austere life. But then for devotees of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, we live very poor lives. We have nothing. But then Nimai has so much opulence. Even Sachi Mata and Jagannath Mishra were very poor by material standards, but they were very happy because Nimai was the center of their lives. So the learned scholars, they consulted the horoscope, and so they named him Vishvambara Nimai. And then they invited all the Brahmanas there who recited the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the Vedas. There were bells rung, conch shells blown, and both demigods and humans chanted Hari. So then came the time to examine the child's preference. What does Nimai like? So they kept a rice paddy, a book, some roasted paddy, money, gold, and silver, all in different directions. And then Jagannath Mishra slapped Nimai on the bum and then pushed him in a direction, and then Nimai went towards the Srimad Bhagavatam, heralding his future performance as being a great preacher of the Bhagavad Dharma of Krishna Chaitanya. So he picked it up and he held the Srimad Bhagavatam to his chest, and he very much loved the embrace of the chest. So as soon as he embraced the Bhagavatam, all the chaste ladies, the Lakshmi Priya, started chanting Jaya, Jaya, and so much wonderful merriment was there in the situation. And we're reminded that without the Lord, no activity is successful. So essentially, when the Lord is the center of our activities, everything will be successful, whereas if the Lord is not there, then no activity, no matter how hard you try, will be successful. So all your endeavors will be useless. So essentially there's another beautiful pastime where Nimai was deciding to he was fearless even as a little baby. So he walked through the courtyard, he grabbed whatever he liked, and one time he walked out in the courtyard and there's a snake, which devotees know as an Antashesh, and so he grabs the snake and he starts laying on the coils of the snake. At which point Mother Shachi walks out into the courtyard and she yells out, "Garuda! Garuda!" Such was her desire to protect her own son. So then Lord Ananta decided to depart, but even then Nimai wanted to catch him. Jagannath Mishra had to hold onto Nimai's arm and bring him back in, so he wanted to catch the Anantashesh. And so then as soon as Jagannath Mishra caught him, he always had a battle with the Lakshmi prayers, the chaste ladies. There was always a battle. I want to hold Nimai, he's on my lap. There was never a situation where I'm fed up, I'm tired now, put the baby down, who can hold him? No, there was always an endless supply of these chaste ladies who wanted to hold Nimai and never let him go. There was a transcendental tug of war. So then the ladies would yell out, "May you live a long life." And they tied a protective charm on his wrist, someone chanted auspicious mantras, and someone sprinkled the Charanamrita on him. So whoever hears these confidential topics with devotion will never be bitten by the snake of material existence. So it's very important that we hear these with love and devotion. And there's a very beautiful saying, if you go to chapter 13 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada writes, "Nitya Nava Nava Yamana," which is a very beautiful word, and it's explained that the devotees are more and more eager to hear the pastimes of the Lord. So it's not a situation where, I've heard this pastime of the thief, I don't need to hear it more. It's Nitya Nava Nava Yamana. So we become more and more enthused. The more and more we hear it, we want to hear it more. And so you hear, the great devotees like Rupa Goswami praying for hundreds and thousands of ears so they can hear simultaneously all the pastimes of the Lord at the same time. So it's explained, Sarva papai pramuchate. Anyone who hears these pastimes is sure to become free from all sinful reactions. So we understand that Nimai in his baby form is beautiful and it defeats the beauty of millions of cupids. His body resembled the color of the rising sun. So essentially Mother Sachi had so much love for Nimai that she examined the base of his feet. And we know that Krishna has red feet. Krishna, even in his Chaitanya form, also had red feet. And it's explained they're as bright as the pomegranate flowers. So Mother Sachi would see this and she'd be like, "Oh, Nimai, he's bruised his feet. What are you doing walking around in the courtyard?" And she'd be desperate just to pick him up, such as to alleviate the pain of his feet. And we know that was also present in Sita. When they were exiled from the kingdom, then Sita said to Ram, "Let me walk first, I will tread down the grass such that your feet will not be pricked by the thorns." But then Ram overwhelmed Sita and said, "No, I'll carry you on my back." So there's these beautiful pastimes of trying to protect Krishna's lotus feet. Because we know from Bilva Mangala Thakur that when Krishna meets the devotees, he has a peacock feather in his hair, he has a Markata jewel on his chest, as well as he has a beautiful smile on his face, and restless eyes and a very delicate body. So even if a leaf falls on Krishna's body, it will leave some bruise there. So although, as we explained, Jagannath and Sachi were always poor, because everything they had they gave to Krishna Chaitanya, they gave to Vishvambara Nimai. And so essentially he was always bedecked with these amazing jewels. He had the beautiful jewel around his waist, he had beautiful ankle bells on, wrist bells, necklace, so many beautiful jewels. And one day these thieves see these jewels on this Vishvambara Nimai, and they plot that they're going to steal them from him. They're going to kidnap Nimai and then steal these costly ornaments. So essentially they coaxed Nimai out and they said, "Climb on our shoulders." And the way they bewildered all the people there was they pretended that Nimai was their own son. So essentially, when we go to Rupa Goswami, we know in the Vatsalya Ras we can see Krishna as our father, but we can also see Krishna as our son. So Krishna reciprocated with them and said, yes, okay, that's great, let's go. And so the thieves carried him, Nimai, Vishvambara Nimai, on their shoulders. And so then all the onlookers thought they were just taking their own son back home. So then the thieves started walking off in the distance, and they're thinking to themselves, today's our payday, we've got all these beautiful costly gems, isn't this wonderful? And so they walked around. But Krishna has a Yoga Maya feature. He has the ability to bewilder those devotees, especially if they approach him in an inappropriate manner. So they started walking around, and then they thought they'd arrived at their own home, but in actual fact, Nimai, through his potency, had misled them. They walked around in a circle, and they landed straight outside the front of Jagannath Mishra's house again. So it's a very beautiful pastime. The thieves even gave Nimai a piece of sandesh, and they were explaining to him, we're almost home. So they deceived the Lord like that. However, but the ultimate Krishna is the gambling of cheats. Krishna is capable of bewildering even the most powerful mystic yogis. So then Jagannath Mishra, as soon as the thieves put him down, they were ready to take off the ornaments, and then Krishna ran straight to Jagannath Mishra. So this is an example of how Krishna bewilders his devotees. It's a beautiful pastime of Vrindavan Das Thakur, and we're fortunate that he manifested such that we can hear these beautiful pastimes. And then you might think to yourself, well, okay, that's the thieves. They approached Krishna in an inappropriate manner, so perhaps are they the only ones that become bewildered by Krishna's potency? And then as we examine further in Chaitanya Bhagavat, it explains even Lord Ananta becomes bewildered, because he has hundreds and thousands of mouths which are eternally reciting the glories of Krishna, and still from time immemorial he's been chanting about Krishna, the glorious pastimes, and he's still been unable to reach the limit of the knowledge of Krishna. So this is an example of Lord Ananta being bewildered. And there's also another way that Lord Shiva, we know of Shiva, Vaishnava, Shambhu. Lord Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava. And then it's explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 8, Chapter 12, Text 10, that Lord Shiva, even in the presence of his own wife, was bewildered by the Mohini feature of the Lord. If we go back to the text that we're studying today, it explains the bewilderment as Mohini. So you might ask yourself, what is the Mohini feature? So essentially what happens was Lord Shiva is sitting in Kailash, and he's sitting in perfect posture, and he's thinking to himself, I'm the perfect brahmachari. Nothing can contaminate my senses, everything's been thrown at me, all the heavenly planets, everything, and still I'm able to overcome any of these sense gratificatory desires. So then Krishna is in the heart of every living entity, so he decides to test out Shiva. Is he indeed the best brahmachari? So he manifests his Mohini Murti form, this beautiful form of the Lord in a female form, and she's laughing and she's bouncing a ball. So Lord Shiva breaks his meditation, he hears the bouncing of the ball, and then he says, okay, well, I've got to go back to my meditation, trying to snap out of it. And then so he sees Mohini dancing and bouncing the ball and laughing, and then so straight away his lusty desires are aroused. So then he runs towards this Mohini Murti, and just as he's about to catch the Mohini Murti, Krishna turns back into his original Shama Sundara form playing the flute, and then he looks directly at Lord Shiva and he says, you think you're the perfect brahmachari? So it's a beautiful story about how all the demigods can even become bewildered by, it's explained, Daivi Hesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya. So this material energy of mine is very difficult to overcome. And it's explained that even Lord Shiva was in the presence of his own wife. Uma Devi was there seeing the whole thing, and still Lord Shiva broke his samadhi and then ran towards Mohini Murti. So then when we examine even the Talavakara Upanishad, it explains that so many demigods have been bewildered by Krishna. And there was a beautiful, very amazing battle between the demons and the demigods. And so Krishna decided to intervene and allow the demigods to win, because as we know, the good will always triumph over evil. So in this instance, the demigods were able to triumph over the evil. But what happens with the demigods? They forgot to acknowledge Lord Vishnu as the reason for their victory. And so they started thinking, oh, I'm Vayu, I'm so great, I controlled the wind, therefore it's my wind presence that destroyed all these demons on the battlefield. And Agni said as well, I'm the greatest fire god, I burnt all these demons to smithereens, so therefore I'm the greatest demigod. And so they started self-glorifying themselves like this. So then the Supreme Personality of Godhead decides to manifest a yaksha form. And so then he approaches Agni first, and he says, who are you? And he says, I'm the celebrated Agni, the knower of the Vedas. I can burn anything to smithereens in just a faint, even a slight of a second. And so Krishna in his yaksha form puts this tiny bit of straw in front of Agni, and he says, prove it to me, show me how you can burn this to smithereens. So Agni decides, I'm going to get all my mystic power, all my strength, all my will, I'm going to burn this to smithereens. And then he wasn't able to burn the tiny bit of straw to smithereens. He wasn't even able to put it on flames. So then he stood defeated in front of this yaksha who was Krishna. And so he goes back to the demigods and he explains to them, I wasn't able to understand this Supreme Personality, or this wonderful yaksha. And then so Vayu says, well, you're Agni, I'm better than that, I can go there and I can do that. So then Vayu approaches this yaksha form of Krishna, and then he says, the yaksha form says to Vayu, who are you? And then he says, I'm the great celebrated Vayu, I can blow anything in this whole world, and nothing stands any chance in front of me, I can blow it out of the way. And then so the yaksha form says, a tiny bit of straw in front of this Vayu, can you blow this straw please? And then so with all his might, with all his strength, with all his presence, he tries to blow this tiny bit of straw, and alas, not able to move the straw even one fraction of a millimeter. So then Vayu then goes back to the demigods and says, I don't understand this personality, who is he? I am not able to use any of my force to even move this tiny bit of straw. So then finally Indra goes in front of this yaksha form, and then as soon as Krishna in his yaksha form sees Indra, he disappears straight away. And then Umadevi comes to Indra and says, this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's the reason why you won on the battlefield. And then instantly Indra paid obeisances to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he realized that the best thing to do was to always glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and never take credit ourselves. So Srila Prabhupada was very determined to instill this in his devotees, so much so in the Srimad Bhagavatam we hear Srila Prabhupada write, one of the central tenets of our whole philosophy is glorification of others and chastisement of ourselves. So in that way we'll never fall into the victim of becoming prideful. So essentially we can move on to more wonderful, bewildering pastimes of the Lord, and perhaps this is an opportunity to read the chapter, or explain chapter 13 of the Krishna book, which explains the kidnapping of the boys and the calves. And I particularly chose this one because in the introduction we owe so much to Srila Prabhupada. In October and November of 1977, the publishers of the chapter 13 explained that this was the last Leela that Srila Prabhupada explained. Even on his deathbed, they held up a dictaphone to Srila Prabhupada, and what they would do is they would chant the Sanskrit shloka and then put the dictaphone in front of Srila Prabhupada's mouth, and then what came out was this beautiful dissertation of the stealing, or the Brahma Vimohana Leela. So, and we're eternally indebted to Srila Prabhupada for that fact, and it's amazing, the publishers of the book write that a doctor was consulting with Srila Prabhupada as he was about to leave his body, and then he said, your spiritual master is not an ordinary man, because any ordinary man would be suffering, they'd be crying, they'd be screaming at the amount of pain that he's going through, and yet he's still able to translate the work right up until leaving his body. So All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and so we have this wonderful Brahma Vimohana Leela as a result of Srila Prabhupada's mercy. So we're all quite familiar with the Brahma Vimohana Leela. So Brahma, the reason why it's explained that he wanted to steal the boys and the calves was to understand more of the inconceivable potencies of the Lord. It was just a matter of understanding, because essentially Brahma had been flying along on his swan carrier and he saw Aghasura, this massive snake, and he saw that he was ready. He was so ready to kill all the inhabitants of Vrindavan that he manifested this snake form, and the top of his lip was right up into the sky and the bottom of his lip was on the floor. And then, so as we know, Krishna was able to kill Aghasura. So then this pastime of killing Aghasura wasn't discussed for a whole year. So then Krishna decides to take the cowherd boys. He explains to them, get your mother to pack a picnic lunch. We'll go out tomorrow and we'll celebrate on the Jamuna River. Bring the calves, because the tradition was for the elderly men would look after the cows, the grown calves, and then the younger boys would look after the calves. So Krishna had this wonderful scene where he had a picnic and they're all sitting down, and then it was Krishna's idea, just tie up all the calves near the trees and then they'll be safe there and they won't wander too far. But then through the course of their merriment, they were taking so much prasadam, and in Vrindavan at that time, it's explained, Kujat kokila kamsa sada sagana kire mayura kule. So the beautiful sounds of the cuckoos, the beautiful sound, mayura kule, the singing and dancing of the peacocks was occurring during this beautiful picnic feast of Krishna. So Krishna, one of the cowherd boys says, why don't you let the calves just roam free? There's so much beautiful grass further out. Just let them go. Everything's fine here in Vrindavan. So, because they had the mood of Krishna would save them from everything. They would just cry out for Krishna at any time, and then Krishna would save them. Such was it. They even decided to go into the mouth of Aghasura, knowing full well Krishna will save us. So the calves started walking out, and then it's explained just the fine details of yogurt and rice in his left hand, and through his finger joints you could see the yogurt and rice in his left hand as well as bits of fruit. So that's what Krishna was eating, and then he decides to get up, seeing that the calves had gone too far out. And so it was Krishna who went off to try and find the calves. And then so when he walked into the forest, he automatically, Krishna being omniscient, knew that something had gone wrong. And this was the opportunity that Brahma took to firstly kidnap the boys and then kidnap the calves and then put them in a mystic slumber. So essentially what that meant was the cowherd boys and calves were away, and so this was what Aghasura wanted to do. He wanted to kill all the cowherd boys because the mothers would be so bereft of their ability to love, because their whole life and soul was their own children. And so if their own children weren't there, they would basically lose their lives. Their life and soul would be gone. So Krishna is so magnificent and so magnanimous. It's explained, Ekam Bahunam Sham. So Krishna manifested every single one of the cowherd boys and calves in perfect detail, down to where the bugle was placed, down to where they had flutes as well, they had musical instrument. Everything was perfect. Ekam Bahunam Sham. So Krishna manifested himself such that to mitigate the suffering of all the cows and the mothers of Vrindavan. So Krishna did this, and then after that, every resident of Vrindavan realized they started loving their own sons so much more. Previously, Krishna was the center of everyone's existence. Everyone loved Krishna so much, and their love for Krishna was growing every day, whereas they still had love for their own calves and their own sons, but it was on a much lesser scale. But as a result of Ekam Bahunam Sham, Krishna manifested into so many different forms, then the residents of Vrindavan started loving their own sons increasingly, and increasing at a rate same as the rate they were loving Krishna more and more. So, and it's explained, Parasya Brahmanaha Shaktihi. Everything is an expansion of the energies of the Lord, as heat and light are expansions of fire. And Prabhupada also gives the explanation of the sun and then little pots of water. Whilst you can see the sun in the water, if it's in the right direction towards the sun, it has the same qualities, but it's simultaneously one and different. So Krishna was expanding himself, and the mothers, they didn't lose anything. In fact, they gained as a result of Krishna displaying this mystic opulence. And this occurred for a whole year. And then Balaram is also very highly intelligent. So then he started saying to Krishna, how are you doing this? We see that the residents of Vrindavan are loving their own sons, their own calves, so much more. How are you doing this? So Krishna explained him the whole scene. Brahma's kidnapped the cowherd boys. I have to, manifest so many different forms to please all the residents of Vrindavan. So therefore, that's what he did. And then there's a beautiful scene where it's explained that the cowherd men were herding the cows right at the top of Govardhan Hill. And it's very steep terrain. And then so as soon as the cows saw their own calves, they started running down. They joined their front and hind legs and just bolted down. And the cowherd men were trying to stop them, but to no avail. These big cows were just tearing down Govardhan Hill to reach their calves. And so as soon as they licked their own calves and then they gave their milk, so much loving affection from the cows to the calves. And then the cowherd men saw their own cowherd boy, their own sons down there, so they ran down the hill as well. And so then it's a sign of love and affection when they smelt the hair, they smelt the heads, and then so many loving exchanges. And this is the time when Balaram comes back on his swan carrier. He sees this scene, and he sees a whole year had passed, even though in his time it was only a moment. He thought he's just gone and put the calves and cowherd boys in mystic slumber, and then he decides to come back. So then right then was the opportunity where Krishna decided to display his full magnificence. So what happened was he started dancing, and then so all of the cowherd boys, they had their Vishnu forms as well. All the demigods appeared, so many hundreds of millions of Brahmins appeared, and so many, all the animals were dancing for Krishna, with Krishna in the center, all these Vishnu forms, and immediately Brahma realized, what have I done? You've kidnapped the cowherd boys and calves from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What have I done? So this is the bewilderment of Lord Brahma. It can happen to all of us. We took birth in this material world because we wanted to be the Lord of the universe, as explained in chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita. And so we can become bewildered. The demigods can become bewildered. The foremost devotees can become bewildered. So then what ensued after that? There's always prayachita, or there's always atonement. So therefore, the next chapter after chapter 13 is the prayers of Lord Brahma. So then Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Savakarana Karanam. So then the whole Brahma Samhita was a prayer for Lord Brahma as begging forgiveness as a result of the activities that he's performed. So essentially in this verse also, Prabhupada's talking about contradiction. So essentially if we analyze the words contradiction, we can find in Nectar of Devotion chapter 23, because we hear Krishna is so kind, Krishna is magnanimous. However, to the demons, there was a great elephant, and so in the Kurma Purana there's a beautiful story about Krishna appears as a deer in front of this great elephant, and then as he decides to show his full form, and he decides to defeat this big elephant. And so Krishna has to kill sometimes, and he has to fight with the demons, and so Krishna has to challenge them. So it's not a contradiction, it's actually merely just a display of Krishna's opulence. And then there's a beautiful statement in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila chapter 16 text 82 that everyone knows that lotus flowers grow in the water, but water never grows from a lotus. All such contradictions, however, are wonderfully possible in Krishna. The great river Ganges has grown from his lotus feet. So the lotus flower in the water, not able to produce water, however Krishna's lotus feet are able to produce unlimited amounts of water. So there's also a beautiful conversation between Rukmini and Krishna where Rukmini is saying about all these contradictions. You have described yourself as penniless. Therefore, the condition you're in is not poverty. So, and you've also described yourself as having no belongings. Yet you have 900,000 cows. So how is this? No one is more rich than you. You describe yourself in Chaitanya Leela. Lord Chaitanya is describing himself as the greatest fool. And yet he understands the Vedas inside out, back to front. He's omniscient. He's completely perfect in knowledge. So that's the beautiful conversation in Krishna book chapter 60 between Rukmini and Krishna. And she's saying, how can you be categorized among the poor? So that's even Krishna personally, he chastises himself and showing himself to be the perfect renunciate. So, and then there's a beautiful statement if we go to the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because in Canto 1, Chapter 18, Text 31, there's a beautiful explanation by Queen Kunti, Bhava Bhavanaya Stitasya. So that's explaining that Krishna, despite the fact that fear personified is afraid of Krishna, that Krishna is afraid of Mother Yashoda's stick. She's quite a heavy lady, and she has a stick, and this is Krishna who's in complete fear. And then it's also explained, Lakshmi Sahasra Shata Sambrama Sevimanam. Krishna is served by hundreds of millions of goddesses of fortune, yet still he steals butter like someone who's poverty-stricken. So this is the contradictory qualities of Krishna. He's afraid of his mother's stick, everyone fears the order of Krishna. And then last night I was listening to a lecture of His Holiness Indrajumna Swami, and then we try and reconcile the fact that Krishna never leaves Vrindavan, because Rupa Goswami explains Vrindavan Parityaja. So Krishna never leaves Vrindavan, but then if you go to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, Krishna never goes back to Vrindavan. So how do you reconcile these opposites? And then so Gurudev was explaining about the aprakata lila and prakat lila, the prakat lila and the manifested lila and the unmanifested lila. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is explaining that Krishna never leaves because the unmanifested lila is always going on. Right now in Gokul, there's the birth of Krishna is occurring. They're all simultaneously occurring. There's unmanifest and manifest Leela. So, and then Krishna Prabhupada is explaining to us, we should go to senior devotees and help us to explain these apparent contradictions. Whereas for the Mayavadis, they see these contradictions and they say, well, that's an opportunity for me to give up on Krishna because there's so many contradictions. So we know that, kick the mundane scholars in the face with boots on, and so, so we should, cultivate our Krishna consciousness. And so many times, there was a beautiful letter Prabhupada wrote on the 13th of January 1976, where someone had written about the contradictions in Bhagavad Gita. And then so Prabhupada's response was, how can you think that Krishna is contradicting himself in his own statements? It's your concoction. So we concoct, or the fallen conditioned souls concoct this so-called contradiction, and then, but for the pure devotees, they see no contradiction at all. It's just an aspect of Krishna's potency. So essentially, it's also explained about the intelligence in this verse. So if we go to Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text 4 and 5, there's beautiful descriptions of the intelligence. Here we go. So, Buddhir Gyanam Asamoha Kshama Satyam Dhamma Samaha Sukham Dukham Bhava Bhavo Bhayam Chabhayam Evacha. So intelligence, knowledge, freedom from doubt and delusion, forgiveness, truthfulness, self-control and calmness, pleasure and pain, birth, death, fear, fearlessness, non-violence, equanimity, satisfaction, austerity, charity, fame and infamy are created by me alone. So Krishna is creating intelligence, he's giving intelligence to the devotees. And it's Krishna book chapter 89, Srimad Bhagavatam, it's explained that the devotees are nipuna buddhayaha, which means that they're the most intelligent class of men. Influenced by attachment or hatred, the devotee lives very peacefully and is not agitated by the influence of passion and ignorance. And Prabhupada also speaks about we have to have intelligent leaders in society who are highly intelligent in spiritual life. Otherwise the whole society is doomed. He's saying that civilization becomes spoiled and annihilated when the spiritual aspect of society is not there. And Prabhupada's recommending Varnashram Dharma, that Brahmanas be respected, Vaishnavas be protected, not only offering them sweet words but also facilities. So we have to be very intelligent to understand Krishna. We have to use our intelligence in the right way to glorify Srila Prabhupada and the devotees. So today we've had the wonderful opportunity to remember Pankajanri Prabhu for his glorious presentation of Vrindavan Das Thakur's disappearance. We've all had a brief discussion of the family lineage of Vrindavan Das Thakur, what made him such a brilliant personality. We've also explained the bewilderment that occurs through all devotees get bewildered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His opulence, His magnificence. And finally we've discussed about the intelligence that's required to be a devotee, the intelligence that's required in society. So does anyone have any questions or comments at all? Or? No? All good? So, yes, Prabhu. I would very much love it. As it is explained, when you hear that word Nitya Navanava Yamana, it does become more and more eager to hear more, to speak more. So, yeah, it is great. So, we're in a very wonderful time, so thank you so much for your attendance. I pray for your blessings that we can continue this service. I pray for all the health and happiness of all the devotees. And Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.